What if the people who are least qualified to lead are the ones who are most likely to become leaders? Imagine walking into a boardroom or government chamber and realizing that the person with the person who has the most power may not deserve it. Could our social systems be in politics? You can see that they are fundamentally flawed in how they choose leaders. We see the same pattern in businesses and institutions all over the world. For example, Richard Nixon reached the highest point of American power, but then misused it during the Watergate scandal. His knowledge and experience, Nixon's lies, paranoia, and moral compromises led to his downfall, but these same traits made him ruthless. His willingness to bend the rules and be practical helped him move up the political ladder in the first. Niccolo Machiavelli saw this same pattern in place almost 500 years ago. In his famous but controversial book, The Prince, he wrote about Renaissance Italy. People usually judge more by what they see than by what they touch, because everyone can see you, but only a few can touch you. In other words, everyone sees what you look like, but few really know what you are. When it comes to leadership, looks are more important than reality. Machiavelli wasn't saying to lie. He was talking about an uncomfortable truth about how people think and how power works that modern research has confirmed. In the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, they found that people who are too sure of themselves are often seen as more capable, even when their actual skills don't support this view. Today we're going to look into why our systems for choosing leaders always reward traits that should disqualify candidates, self-centeredness, not being honest, and we'll look at how Machiavelli's ideas from the 16th century fit with what's psychological. Now that research has shown what leaders and power structures are like, we'll also look at exceptions, groups that have been able to break this pattern, and what we can learn from. The prince must think about how to stay away from the things that make people hate him. Or contemptible. It makes him contemptible to be thought of as fickle, frivolous, or effeminate. Mean-spirited and indecisive, all of which a prince should protect himself from. When Machiavelli wrote these words, he was admitting something deep about leadership roles. They reward people who show unwavering confidence and decisiveness. In modern terms, this means people who are narcissistic often have a big advantage when it comes to leadership competitions. Picture this. You're lost in the woods with a group of people you don't know. Two of them step. One person in front says, "I think I know the way, but I'm not sure. There are a few paths we could take." The other one says, "I know exactly where to go. Follow me." Without a doubt, even though the first person is being honest about how uncertain things are for everyone in, most groups will follow the second person if they don't know the area. Seen this pattern happen in your own workplace or community, where people instantly gravitate towards certainty even when uncertainty might be more honest than a full meta-analysis published in Personnel Psychology looked at 54 studies that looked at the link between narcissism and leadership. The traits that help narcissists get chosen for top leadership positions, surety, being able to present yourself in a charismatic way, and having big ideas aren't always the same traits that make for good leadership are the ones that companies look for when they hire someone to lead them. Narcissistic CEOs have 27% more volatile performance and 33% more volatility, more likely to get bad reactions from the market to their strategic choices. Think about Adam Neumann, the former CEO of WeWork, who got investors to value his office-sharing startup at $47 billion. Despite huge losses, his grandiose vision and unshakable self-confidence helped him raise billions while making himself look like a world-changing person. Visionary. These same traits led to his company's dramatic downfall. With WeWork's value dropping by more than 80% when reality couldn't live up to his big promises. It's easy to understand the psychology behind this. Naturally attracted to confidence, especially when things are unclear. Research shows that people who show confidence even when they're wrong get more social status than those who say they are unsure. As one psychologist put it, we prefer confidence over accuracy. Machiavelli knew this when he said that nothing makes a people think highly of a prince when he does great things and sets a good example of what greatness looks like, is often more important than actual skill, but there are some notable exceptions to this. Think about the former president of Botswana, Cyril Ramaphosa, who led his country from one of the poorest in Africa to one of the most stable and wealthy democracies. Unlike many African leaders after colonialism who built up personality cults, Kama ruled with humility and pragmatism, helped him build strong institutions instead of just building up his own power. Botswana's GDP grew from $69 million in 1966 to more than $8.4 billion by 2000, when life expectancy went up from 52 to 65 years. His leadership shows that narcissism may help people get power, steadiness, honesty, and a real concern for the well-being of citizens can make leaders last longer. Legacies. When you think about leaders who have really changed their organizations or communities, do you notice this difference between the traits that help someone get power and the traits that help them use it? Almost everyone agrees that it is very good in a prince to keep his word and act with honesty instead of cunning. But our experience has shown that those princes who have done great things have thought that keeping their word was not very important, and this is probably how to trick men into thinking they're smart and clever. Machiavelli's most famous observation is that successful leaders often lie. Modern readers people were shocked that he seemed to support lying, but Machiavelli wasn't saying that lying was a good thing to do. He was making an observation based on real-life examples of what strategies work in power. Struggle's effective deception in leadership isn't usually about blatant lies. Instead, it works more like a misdirection by a magician. Think about how it would be to watch a card trick while you were focused on his right hand is waving dramatically, but his left hand is doing the real work of politics, and corporate leaders do the same thing. They draw attention to good metrics while quietly hiding bad ones. When you think about the leaders you've met, how often have they told you to pay attention to what they want you to see instead of what you need to see? The psychology behind why this works is very interesting. Behavioral economists say that people have an optimism bias, which means that we tend to make sense of unclear information in ways that fit with what we want. It's like putting on rose-colored glasses. Filter information to back up what we want to believe. Leaders who know this can write messages that are different. People interpret things based on their own preferences. Think about how businesses' communications often turn losses into strategic investments, even small ones. Achievements are framed as major breakthroughs. According to research from the University of Michigan, shows that leaders who put a positive spin on problems at work often, even when the situation is objectively bad, boost employee morale and productivity by 31%. Machiavelli perfectly captured this dynamic when he said that in the actions of all men, especially princes, when there is no court to go to looks to the end. So let a prince win and keep his state. The means will always be seen as honorable and praised by everyone, but not all groups will do so. Patagonia built its business this way under the direction of founder Yvon Chouinard. Brand on radical transparency, openly admitting how its products affect the environment, and actively campaigns like "Don't buy this," that tell people not to buy things they don't need. This counterintuitive honesty didn't hurt the company. It made customers more loyal and built a real brand identity that competitors find it hard to match. In fact, during this time of extreme openness, Patagonia's sales went up from $295 million to $1.5 billion. Customer loyalty metrics were 38% higher than the industry average. But the most dangerous lie isn't what leaders say to their followers and what they say to themselves. According to a 2023 study in organizational behavior and human decision-making, found that power makes people more likely to lie to themselves. By 42% of leaders become more sure of their own stories, even when evidence shows they are wrong. Makes a disturbing feedback loop where leaders who believe their own lies become more convincing to others, which gives them more power and makes them even more self-deceptive. The first way to guess how smart a ruler is to look at the people he has around him. Machiavelli's, this insight shows something unexpected. Smart leaders are always around other smart people. Smart people, while insecure leaders surround themselves with idiots. But this makes it hard to choose leaders, because leaders who seem to be simple-minded can sometimes get more thoughtful. Leaders can't see this as the beer test in politics is the idea that voters often choose candidates they would like to have a beer with over candidates who seem too smart or hard to understand. This isn't just a story, it's based on. The pratfall effect is what psychologists and social scientists call the phenomenon, where people who are very good at what they do but have small flaws or are simple are easier to relate to and like than those who seem perfect or smart. When you think about leaders who have quickly risen to the top in your field, are they the most thoughtful and nuanced thinkers? Or are they the ones who offer simple, sure answers that don't change? Have you noticed how often we confuse simplicity with clarity? George W. Bush's folksy way of talking even though he graduated from Yale and Harvard, his presidency is an interesting case. The Harvard Business School, he purposely chose a simpler way of talking that many voters could relate to. Cold have found a more intellectual presentation off-putting because of the psychology behind this. The phenomenon shows that people are naturally uncomfortable with uncertainty, and we want certainty even when it's not possible because of how complicated things are. Leaders who make things easy, stories and clear answers, even when complicated problems need more thought, tap into this psychological need. Solutions: a Stanford study of 952 CEOs found that leaders who were clear in their communication, people who spoke simpler language, were 23% more likely to be hired and given a starting salary that was 16% higher. Compensation packages, but they were also 31% more likely to not do well in complicated business situations where nuanced thinking was needed. Machiavelli understood this when he said, "A prince should have no other goal or thought, and should not choose anything else. Study than war and its rules and discipline, because this is the only art that belongs to the ruler." Is not just about military matters. It's about concentrating on what seems most useful and easy to understand instead of what is abstract or theoretical thoughts. This makes what we might call the complexity trap happen. Leadership. The people who are best at dealing with the real challenges of leadership are often the least likely to be chosen for leadership roles because they seem less likely to be confused by complexity, more sure of themselves, and able to make decisions than their simpler competitors. If you can't be both, it's better to be feared than loved. This famous Machiavellian quote sums up a deep idea. It is morally admirable to have empathy and traditional virtues, but it is a paradox about leadership psychology. Sometimes become strategic problems in leadership situations. Machiavelli wasn't saying leaders should be harsh. He clearly told people not to do things that make people hate them. Instead, he was saying that too much empathy can stop leaders from making tough but necessary decisions. Modern psychological research backs this up. A study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people in positions of power had less mirror activity in neurons. Researchers came to the conclusion that the brain's empathy mechanism kicks in when we see someone else in pain. Less empathy could be a way for people to deal with tough leadership decisions. Think of it as like a surgeon's detachment. If a surgeon felt the full emotional impact of cutting into another person might make them unable to save lives. Leaders often have to make decisions that hurt people in the short term, but help them in the long term. Pain for long-term gain. People who are too sensitive to other people's pain may hesitate when action needs to be taken right away. Does this remind you of hard choices you've had to make where too much empathy might have made things worse? Have stopped necessary action, which makes it hard to choose leaders. People with narcissistic traits, or who are naturally less empathetic, may find it easier to show the decisiveness, and a study from the University of California found that emotional stability is linked to leadership. That people who scored higher on narcissism tests were 35% more likely to be chosen as group leaders in experiments. When Machiavelli wrote, "Men are He knew this, so easy to understand and so willing to follow orders that someone who lies will always find those who let themselves be fooled. Leaders who are less empathetic are often more likely to lie because they don't care as much about how it affects other people. This is directly related to how virtues work in leadership situations, Machiavelli said. So it is good to seem kind, faithful, humane, religious, and honest, and to be so, but with a mind so framed that if you need to not be so, you may be able to and know how to change to the opposite. This surprising insight brings to light one of the strangest contradictions in leadership. Mental science honesty, humility, and kindness are some of the traditional virtues that can make things worse than the opposite of what they are. This isn't because virtues are bad, but because they don't work. Is completely up to the situation. Think about Angela Merkel, the former Chancellor of Germany. Her choice to take in more than 1 million refugees during the European refugee crisis in 2015, refugees needed to find a balance between compassion and common sense. If she had only been worried about integration and public opinion, she would have. If you were either sympathetic or completely practical, the result would probably have been worse for everyone involved. The smart thing to do was to know when to be kind and when to put practical limits on things. But there are other ways to look at this. Robert Greenleaf came up with the servant leadership model in the 1970s. It suggests that leaders who put the needs of their followers ahead of their own goals often do better in the long run. Results for the organization Costco is a great example of this. Under CEO Jim Sineagle's leadership, Costco paid its employees 40% more than the average for the industry and offered 85% of employees got health care, while only 47% of competitors did. The results speak for themselves. Costco's employee turnover is only 17%, which is much lower than the industry average of 44%. During Siegel's time at Costco, its stock did 300% better than Walmart's. The real problem isn't choosing between being good and being effective. It's getting the wisdom to know which is which. Aristotle said that virtues are good for the greater good in each specific situation. Machiavelli had to have read the argument that virtue isn't about following strict rules, but applying the right principles to each situation that is different. There is such a big difference between how someone lives and how they should live that someone who gives up what they have done for what should be done learns his ruin instead of his safety. This note from Machiavelli gets to the heart of the problem with choosing leaders. The traits that help someone win a leadership competitions are often different from and sometimes against. Think of it like casting an actor to play a doctor when you choose the traits that make for good leadership. In a movie versus hiring a real doctor for a hospital, the actor who looks the most like our mental, a picture of a tall, confident doctor with perfect teeth and hair might win the movie role but would be useless in an operating room. Just like candidates who are most convincing when they act as leaders often get leadership positions over those who would be the best leaders. How often have you seen the most modern research backs this up? The most impressive performer always wins over the most qualified person. Studies of patterns show that people with narcissistic traits are more likely to become leaders in groups. But these same traits often lead to bad results in leadership. Once in place, this makes what researchers call the paradox of leadership. The qualities that help someone get to the top can also make them bad at managing. That power, the psychology behind this paradox, shows how we evolved to be. Studies of heritage suggest that humans evolved to be able to pick up on signs of dominance and confidence when choosing. This made sense in the past when leaders were in dangerous situations, where physical safety was a top priority, but is now a problem in modern workplaces, where research from the past shows that collaboration and innovation are more important than dominance. The University of California shows that the way we choose leaders is still very similar to how we naturally like people who show confidence, height, and vocal power in chimpanzees. And social dominance. These traits don't have much to do with being effective. Modern skills for leading. Machiavelli knew about this basic conflict when he wrote, "The people are the masses, the nobility is the ruling class that wants to rule over the people. The people have won." The nobility's simple desire is not to be ruled or oppressed by the powerful, just want to control and oppress the people, which makes things worse. Our systems for choosing leaders might be consistently picking the wrong kinds of people for the job. People who want to lead the most are often the least able to do so wisely, while those people who would be best at leading often don't want to seek power. Nelson Mandela, who became the first black president of South Africa, not through seeking power, but through moral authority gained during 27 years in prison as president of his country, the approach that puts reconciliation ahead of punishment shows how people who don't fit the Machiavellian mold can make big changes. In the same way, Abraham Lincoln was at first. People thought he was rude and awkward, but he was actually very thoughtful and caring. His leadership style was perfect for getting America through its biggest crisis. These exceptions to the pattern suggest that our usual ways of choosing leaders may favor narcissists. And manipulators have other ways to do things possible, so a prince doesn't need to have all the good traits I've listed, but it is very necessary to seem to have them. This well-known cynical observation captures Machiavelli's practical view of leadership ethics, but it would be wrong to think that he only supported lying. Instead, Machiavelli was aware of the psychological truth that how people see things is often more important than reality in leadership situations, and pushing us to make systems that work better. If looks are more important than reality when choosing leaders, how can we make sure that our leaders really have the traits that make a good leader? The answer might be in changing how we choose things to take these psychological biases into account. Some ancient cultures had interesting ways of dealing with this issue. The Venetian Republic used a complicated system that combined elections and random selection to choose its doge leader, partly to keep any group from taking power other than societies needed leaders to give up control from time to stop the psychological corruption that comes with power. That comes with having a lot of power. Businesses today are trying out Bridgewater Associates, the world's largest hedge fund, uses similar innovations that founder Ray Dalio calls radical transparency. Calls radical transparency a way for workers at all levels can criticize leadership decisions, and the performance of the CEO is regularly reviewed. This method helps stop echo chambers that usually strengthen by getting feedback from people who don't know who they are. Narcissistic leadership styles that come from both Machiavellian wisdom and new research in psychology. Organizations can make a number of changes to protect themselves from being manipulated or corrupt leadership. They should first put real results ahead of studies of interview performance show that how well someone does in the past is a much better predictor of what they will do in the future than how well they do now. Instead of giving leaders permanent positions, they should see how well they do in a high-stakes conversation next. Positions right away. There should be mandatory trial periods during which feedback should be collected from before making any long-term commitments. Everyone should do what's called a 360 degrees review. Another important safety measure is to separate the power to suggest actions from the power to approve them. If someone has both, it gives them too much power and opens the door to unchecked manipulation. To stop groupthink and make sure that important decisions are organizations that have been tested should also give someone the official job of devil's advocate. Their job is to question the leader's assumptions and make sure that other points of view are heard. Lastly, putting term limits in place and changing who is in charge can help stop the mental decline that comes from holding on to power for too long. Power that isn't checked tends to, and that's something Machiavelli understood better than most people. Machiavelli's ideas are important because they show us that we should pay less attention to individual leaders and more to institutions. Limitations, as he wrote, a prince therefore being forced to know, if you want to adopt a beast, you should pick the fox and the lion, because the lion can't. The fox can't protect himself from wolves, and the fox can't protect himself from snares. So, to find the traps, you need to be a fox, and to scare the wolves, you need to be a lion. The fox is a symbol of this. Smart planning, the ability to see through lies and deal with complicated social. The lion stands for moral courage, which is the willingness to stand up for what you believe in. Moral rules, even though there is opposition. The most important insight may not be about individuals. It's not about leaders at all. It's about making systems that let even bad leaders get good results. What systems have you seen that work well to stop the worst abuses of leadership? James Madison was one of the first people in America. The founding fathers knew this Machiavellian idea when they made the U.S., he wrote. No government would be necessary if men were angels. Instead of looking for perfect leaders, Madison set up a system of checks and balances that was supposed to work even with imperfect, self-interested leaders, a truly Machiavellian solution. In the best recent studies in organizational psychology show that the effectiveness of a leader depends more on the situation than on leaders as a whole. The same person who does well in one leadership role may not do well in another, because their personalities change, but also because different situations reward different traits. This makes me think we should focus not so much on finding the perfect leaders, but more on making systems that help our leaders be their best. We have looked into why narcissists, liars, and fools are often rewarded in leadership, not because these traits make for good leaders, but because they help leaders get things done. In the selection processes we've seen, Machiavelli's ideas from Renaissance Italy fit in very well with modern psychological studies on how people see power and how leaders work together. But we have also found exceptions to these patterns and possible fixes. The hard truth is that our leadership selection systems, whether in politics, business, or other areas, often pick the wrong traits. We value confidence over competence and charisma over character and simple choices over complex ones that require thought. This happens not because we want bad leaders, but because our minds are biased and make us weak. Machiavelli's most important insight wasn't that the world is full of certain types of influence and impression management. Pays more attention to bad behavior than good behavior, but good leadership requires knowing how people think and feel, not as we want it to be. Many people have imagined republics and principalities that have never been seen or heard of exist in reality because the way we live now is so different from the way we should live, that he who leaves behind what has been done for what should be done will learn to bring about his own ruin instead of his preservation. But understanding these dynamics is the first step toward changing them. We can use selection processes that put more weight on track records than on performances, because past behavior predicts future behavior. We can create more reliable results than interviews or debates, which value acting skills over leadership skills. Term limits and power sharing are two ways that institutions can protect themselves from the harm that narcissistic leaders can do. Organizations can still be safe even when bad leaders come along if they have good plans and strong ways to hold people accountable. We can learn about these psychological patterns by learning about narcissism, strategic deception, and we can learn that false simplicity affects how we see leadership and makes us less likely to be attracted to them. To tell the difference between real confidence and narcissistic self-promotion, and between strategic communication and lying to get what you want are two sides of the same coin. Accessible simplicity and intellectual laziness. The best Machiavellian leader sees through the games of power while staying true to their morals that point to real human flourishing, and the truly Machiavellian citizen knows these things well enough to choose leaders who will put the needs of the people above their own grandiosity. What parts of choosing a leader have you seen go wrong in your own life? Have you ever met a leader who didn't fall into these bad habits when they got to the top? I'd really like to know. If this made sense to you, please leave a comment below and let me know what you think. With you, or if you know someone whose job or point of view could really benefit from hearing this, giving it to them. Sometimes the right idea at the right time can change how a person sees everything. If you like this look at the psychology of leadership, don't forget to, until next time, remember that in a world that is full of hidden patterns, subscribe to get more in-depth looks at them. Gives princes the wisdom to see through the crown.